That is why, since that day, I have been planning my escape. I slowly opened the window and I slipped through it without hesitation, landing just behind the bushes that surround the Grand Sea. Once I reached the first trees of the forest, I began to run frantically. However, as soon as I closed my eyes, I heard rapid steps nearby. "Who are you?" As I approached the crowd, I noticed several of them stepping aside, creating a path. Through it, I saw the leader who had struck me earlier.
Sir, she's got one of the envelopes. Who are ye and what's bringing you here?
I have already answered you. I was rescued from my homeland by Arus and his retinue.
Take him back to its hell.
Finally, a kind and remarkable young woman arrived.
The Guardian of the Worlds presents The Diary of Sot, The Threat of the Gracious.
Gulandag, the day 13th of the month of Athermanes of the year 42nd after the Universal War. My dearest diary, I am still uncertain how much time has passed since Alak last appeared, seemingly ready to explain the reasons behind my captivity. Our conversation left me with more questions than answers, intensifying my anticipation for our next meeting. That long-awaited day finally arrived when I least expected it. From my quarters, despite my isolation, I could hear a heavy downpour outside, far more intense than anything I had experienced since awakening here in chains. Suddenly, did the young Elak burst into the room, soaked and agitated. The urgency in her movements and the look on her face made it clear that something deeply troubled her, and I too could not help but feel uneasy. "Is something wrong?" I asked.
I fear it's worse than we reckoned. Much worse,"
she replied, leaving me unsure of what she meant. What are you talking about?"
You remember the tale I was telling you the other day?
Of course.
That light everyone saw in the sky was the sign of the Guardian of the World's arrival. None of those present knew of such a figure, but he did something unheard of. Brought together all the communities on our planet to drive out the invader. But it was all in vain. The strength of the Guardian of the World's forces was so great that no one could beat him.
"So, was it Arus who defeated your king?" I asked.
No. Far as we know, none of our men were harmed in that encounter. King Venk said that despite spending many days trying to breach the invader's defenses, they couldn't get through till the invader decided to show himself. From what they say, King Venk felt such an overwhelming power in that fella. He feared for his life and chose not to fight when face to face with him. I reckon everyone must have felt that power, because no one dared to attack. It was then the invader gave him a choice: accept his presence and live in harmony, so he could rule the universe from here, or perish before his mighty army. So out of fear of the one you call Arus, all the tribes on this planet have lived in peace.
"Then, what's the problem?" I asked, completely baffled by the young woman's nervousness. "Why am I imprisoned?"
It's a bit tricky to explain, so I need you to listen close.
She said, looking at me seriously.
Since that time, we've known some communities on our world didn't take too kindly to the Guardian of the Worlds telling them to live in harmony with the other beings.
Why?
They got to share prey, territory, and more. So they've been spying on the Great White Mansion, hoping to grab a hostage to put an end to this mess.
"So, am I your hostage?"
No, will you listen?
She snapped, her impatience showing.
One of our shamans had a vision a few weeks back. In it, he saw a young man escaping from the Great Mansion and getting caught by the enormous greishes from the north.
"Excuse me, but the enormous what?" I asked, completely confused by the unfamiliar term.
The greishes are creatures that stand between 10 and 13 feet tall. They only got 4 limbs, like you, but they're much bigger and stronger. Despite their size, their looks are deceiving because they're mighty quick. Plus, their skin's tough as the earth and our weapons barely scratch them. Luckily, they've never been our enemies.
I still don't see the problem, I interrupted.
That's because you're a fool.
She replied bluntly.
I told you the greishes been spying on the guardian of the world's house, and you up and escaped from there, which they likely know.
So, you're afraid the greishes will come to capture me? For a moment, the young woman stared at me blankly. That brief moment felt endless, with a sea of questions flooding my mind.
We ain't afraid they'll come.
She said, looking into my eyes with a hint of sadness.
We know they will. What we don't know is what to do with you. Giving you back to the guardian of the worlds would mean war with the greishes. Keeping you here would mean the same.
Then, let me go. That way, you'll be rid of both the greishes and me, I suggested, not realizing how reckless that idea was.
No, if the greishes catch you, they'll use you to sway the guardian of the worlds and wipe out the other beings who compete with them for control of Olympis.
At those words, the young woman fell silent, and I found myself at a loss for what to say. I quickly understood that my escape had inevitably sparked a war between creatures I barely knew for control of our planet. How I cursed that fateful decision at that moment. I'm sorry. I apologized, lowering my head, unable to think of how to fix the terrible situation I had caused.
Being sorry won't help.
Elak said curtly. You're right. Then if the greishes come, I'll fight alongside you, even if that means my death, I declared resolutely. For a second, the young woman's dark pupils dilated, and I saw an expression of joy cross her face, quickly replaced by disbelief.
That's impossible. According to King Ujdaj, you're harmless. You could barely defend yourself against a few simple beasts.
She said, reminding me of how the Ugards had saved me days ago from the attack of those monsters shortly after I fled the Great Hall. I was tired and caught off guard, I shouted in frustration, unwilling to accept that I was indeed no match for any of the creatures on this planet. Release me, and you'll see how I can take down several of those greishes with my bare hands. Upon hearing such a claim, the young woman opened her enormous jaws and began making sounds I interpreted as laughter.
Ain't no way I'm letting you go. All we can do now is wait for the rain to stop and brace for the worst.
Why?
'Cause that's when the greishes will come, according to the prophecy.
After those words, Elak left with the same urgency with which she had arrived, leaving me there, troubled. Despite everything she had told me, I found it hard to accept that the future of these creatures hinged on a vision. But after so many prophecies had come true, I no longer knew what to think.